As a father to a young boy, I think about this a lot. Masculinity. It's a little something about myself before I start rambling, mostly because I know there's a lot of alt-right types that get really triggered when I start talking about masculinity and how we need to deprogram toxic masculinity and all that, because they think I'm some kind of soy boy, cuck, whatever random parroted insults that they haven't really thought up but have heard and are now regurgitating 100 times. If you've watched my channel for some time, you know this, but I'm a former Marine. I was in the Marine Corps from 2006 to 12, and I am currently in licensed security and I have been for about 8.5 years. I've been in martial arts my whole life. I went to school for kinesiology. My dad's a carpenter and formerly an outlaw biker, now born-again biker. His father, my grandpa, also blue collar, former Marine, carpenter his whole life. And then mom's side, same thing. Blue collar, a lot of construction workers, a couple of outlaw bikers. So that's what I grew up around. That's my background. That's who I am. Because the typical stereotype of leftists is that we're all gender confused and purple haired and afraid of guns and all this other stuff. Little secret, those are actually liberals, neoliberals, which the right cannot distinguish from a leftist without going too deep into political definitions. That ain't me. While I am inclusive and I do consider myself a leftist, I do consider myself somebody that loves freedom. I own guns for my job. I get paid to carry. I get paid to be, have body armor on. I get paid to protect people. That's who I am. And the irony of all these far right talking heads claiming everybody else are snowflakes and everybody's so soft. If you color outside of their lines, they get triggered. If you color outside of conservatism, they get triggered. Think about it. What are they trying to conserve? They are trying to conserve the status quo. That's not what this video is. We are going to examine masculinity. We are going to look at what it is, what it isn't, and a lot of the bullshit out there from these talking head chuds that are just trying to get you to pay thousands of dollars to learn to be a man, stuff that your dad probably should have taught you. And I will be addressing the audience as though they are cis-het straight white men. I think this is going to be applicable to anybody that identifies as masculine, but that's my perspective and that's who I'm going to be addressing. I think everyone can learn from this. Everyone can learn from examining masculinity as well as examining femininity. I'll put a few videos in the description on the YouTube version where I actually go over those things and I've examined them in the past. So that being said, I always like to end my videos with be better tomorrow than you were yesterday, because we are our actions, not our words. Words can be hollow, words can be shiny, but it's what you do that shows who you really are. It's when you're in the thick of it, it's when the stressors are on, when there's 5 minutes left on the clock. That's when who you really are shines through. Crisis of masculinity. You will hear this throughout media. There's a crisis of masculinity today. There's soy in everything we eat. The water's turning the frogs gay, whatever BS that somebody's trying to sell you. Here's a little hint. If somebody has some kind of herbal supplements, some kind of program they're trying to sell, anything where they're trying to expand their bottom line by taking advantage of your insecurities, be cautious. That's sus as fuck. Those people are probably trying to grift you into buying their bullshit, buying their snake oil. A real man, a real person that is confident in who they are doesn't need that bullshit. They're confident enough to where they don't buy into that crap. A little secret, every generation has thought that the prior generation is too soft. Back in the 70s, they were saying that high-rises were gonna make people effeminate somehow. Hell, in the 1920s, there were radio programs and whatnot telling men that the younger generation was too soft and they needed to get out there and do a bunch of man stuff. And it's funny because we look back on people from those eras and we're like, that's what a real man was, right? Here's the thing. You've probably heard this before. Masculinity is a social construct. What does that mean? It means that it is something that we build and we label, just like language is a social construct, just like the concept of what we wear to the workplace. Looking professional is a social construct. These are ideas that are built through society, hence social construct. A lot of times when you look at a word, you can break down what it means, right? Social society. social construct, something that society has created. That being said, we are also social animals. So of course we're going to engage within a social construct because that is part of our socializing. That is part of society. It is not static. That's something that a lot of these talking head chuds would like you to believe. They'd like you to believe that the concept of a man, a concept of a woman, has existed for hundreds, if not thousands of years, statically this way, ever since Grog the caveman descended out of the trees and decided to club himself a bride. That's not how history works. That's not how any of this works. Things change over time. Some cultures didn't think a gay relationship was effeminate as long as you were the one on top. These things change over time. They are constructed socially through society. As for these alpha chud grifters like Andrew Tate, Survive the Jive, The Golden One, Alex Jones, Fresh and Fit, all these guys are trying to get your money. They're trying to get you to either buy into their Patreon or ignore the fact that they're all fascists and all connected to some kind of white supremacy, or the fact that they berate women in order to make themselves feel better. All of them have some kind of snake oil they're trying to sell you. These people use weird incel terms like MOG, which apparently is some kind of weird beauty contest between dudes. If you're a masculine man who is confident in who you are, you don't give a fuck about that. Masculinity isn't about beauty contests. Masculinity isn't about trying to be prettier than the next guy. What the fuck does that mean? Incel forums specifically really buy into that bullshit. Stay away from incel forum. It's all a bunch of just toxic bullshit where it's a bunch of people bashing on each other to try to bring everybody low down to their level. It's useless. You don't need it. Nobody needs it. The term alpha was actually a misunderstanding of the parents in a wolf pack. The man who was studying it at the time, Rudolf Schenkel, has actually since retracted that. An alpha in a pack is a dad or a mom. It's the dominant parent. That's what an alpha is. Alpha just means father. The characteristics that you would associate with a father, those are alpha characteristics, not this chest-beating roid rage bullshit. And these same neckbeard fucks will deny the fact that gender is on a spectrum, that you can be masc and femme in various different ways, while simultaneously having 10 different Greek letter spectrums for what they think a man is. Sigma, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, whatever. They have their own gender fluidity, unironically. So what isn't masculinity? Masculinity is not gauged on a negative. That's something you see all the time. You have men nitpicking other men, saying, that's too feminine. The thing you're doing, that's too gay, right? That's too weak. That's too whatever. They look at the things that masculinity isn't rather than what masculinity is. I've mentioned this in previous videos, but Chuck Palahniuk, the author of Fight Club, is a gay man. He's not effeminate, right? Just because you're gay, just because you might do things that society thinks are effeminate, does not mean you are effeminate, does not mean you're any less of a man. But again, these alpha chuds that want to pigeonhole masculinity into this finite little box will try to prescribe that masculinity is this little thing and none of that other stuff. All that other stuff is bad. Who gives a fuck? Again, if you are confident in your masculinity, you do not give a fuck. And despite what some Kermit the Frog voiced, de-licensed psychotherapist may have said, masculinity is not being a monster. Masculinity is being what the monsters fear. It is not bullying one another into some kind of pecking order. It's not being the angriest, most toxic guy on campus in order to swing your dick around. That is not what masculinity is, and it never has been. The people that are confident in their masculinity don't need to do that. They don't need to posture. When I come into a situation and I have to de-escalate, I might have to go hands-on, and somebody's being super aggressive, I'm calm. I'm not posturing. I am looking at the situation. I'm figuring out how to bring the energy down. I'm trying to figure out how to have every party leave amicably. A large part of what security does is liability reduction. So I am trying to find the most peaceful outcome in any given situation. That gun on my hip is basically a prop. Can I use it if fan and feces collide? Absolutely. But that is an extreme rare case. And I don't go brandishing it in order to get people to comply. If you are confident in your ability as a man and your ability to fight, you are confident when you go into those situations. It's the person that doesn't know how to fight. It's the person that isn't confident in their abilities that freaks out under pressure. Masculinity is not static. It changes over time. It changes as you age. I'm almost 40 years old. I've lived a pretty long life. I've had a lot of experiences. I've been a lot of places, not just in the military, but also I moved around a lot as a kid. We were homeless or almost homeless a couple times. I've seen a lot. I've done a lot. I've been through a lot of things. The place you're at in life will also change your perception of masculinity. Masculinity has also changed through the aeons, right? The arch-heathens will see masculinity, Drengskapr, differently than how we do today. Morality changes, technology changes, philosophies change, expand, and grow, and it's up to us in order to improve ourselves to understand those things and to be better tomorrow than we were yesterday. So then what is masculinity? It's a social construct constructed by social animals. People, much like wolves, exist in social groups, packs, families, kindreds, and as such, your peers will decide what that ideal is. If those peers are toxic and doing shitty things and they're bullies, leave them. Find another group. You don't need that shit. It's just bringing you down. Masculinity is strength. It is iron. It is the rocky shore on which the lighthouse sits. And that's not to say that if you're feminine, you can't have those qualities, but femininity is more fluid. It is more adaptive. Masculinity is the oak. Femininity is the reeds and the wind. While the oak is stronger, it is more rigid and less flexible, whereas the flexibility of the reeds means that they are more adaptable, however, they lack the strength. One can be both, one can have a little of both, and in fact, having a little of both means you are balanced. Masculinity is not being a monster, masculinity is being the safe harbor. Right before I deployed in 2009, we had a chaplain that was addressing us. So this chaplain posed a question. He said, what's scarier, the man-eating grizzly bear or the mama bear? And if you're outdoorsy at all and familiar, you know the mama bear is scarier. Why is the mama bear scarier? She has something to protect. She has something to lose. The man-eater, the killer, the psychopath, they're just out there to kill for fun, right? The mama bear has something to lose and will give up her life to fight for that thing. If you're out in the woods and you see a baby bear, you know that it is dangerous because of that mama bear. That is a masculine characteristic. It is a masculine characteristic that mothers can possess, but that is a masculine characteristic. We are the safe harbor for those around us, especially those around us that are less capable. I mean, that's what I do for a living. Masculinity is being what monsters fear, not being monsters. When something bumps in the night, we bump back. Masculinity is stoicism, not the stoicism that these chud neckbeards are trying to sell you. That is a misunderstanding of what stoicism is. Stoicism is not the lack of emotion. Stoicism is the proper emotion at the proper time. And if you go back into the philosophy of like Marcus Aurelius and these old Stoics, you will see that they do not speak against emotion. They talk about having the proper emotion at the proper time. When my grandfather passed away and I saw how the emotions brought the family together, I understood that emotions do have a practical reason. It brought us together, right? That bond we had because we were losing a loved one brought us together. Emotions do have a point. They are not some frou-frou, feminine, useless thing that only gets you in trouble. No. There are more emotions that you are allowed to feel, not just rage. The thing that hangs people up is when you're in a situation and you freak out in that situation. Well, guess what? That's what your training is for, right? That's why you train in martial arts. That's why you go through scenarios. That's why you do those things in order to be prepared in those moments so that you don't freak out in that time, so that you do have the right emotion in that time, or so that you can put your emotions on the back burner at that time, get shit done, and then after the fact, that's when you go back into your emotions and debrief. That's one of the reasons for a debrief. It's whenever a situation occurred, what can we do better? What did we do wrong? How do we feel about it? And then you can plan for the next time an event occurs. Again, that's something that's applicable to security. That's something that's applicable to, law enforcement, military, or even if you're just a regular dude who's trying to protect your family, friends, or loved ones. Because in order to be that Rocky Shore, in order to be that man made of iron, you have to be the one that people can rely on when fan and feces collide. I really enjoyed the end of the movie Equilibrium. If you haven't watched it, absolutely watch it. It's a movie about emotion and really about stoicism and how toxic that can be. The movie takes a lot of the concepts from like Fahrenheit 451, which is another dystopian kind of post-future where everybody's like burning books, nobody's allowed to read, information is all controlled by the government. Well, in Equilibrium, it's emotions. Anything that is emotional, anything that provokes emotion, all that stuff is gone. The main character, played by Christian Bale, plays a grammaton cleric, this kind of law enforcement that goes around almost like in an Inquisition sort of capacity, taking out art and burning it, and people that are like emotion criminals, literally putting them on trial and burning them to death. And they all have to take a certain drug at a certain time in order to not feel those emotions. Well, Christian Bale's character ends up not taking his drug because he's got this whole existential crisis thing that goes on. I won't go too in depth, but at the end, without the drug at all, he's on this polygraph machine, right? And a polygraph machine measures your nerves and stuff. It's not actually a lie detector. It's really just a fancy heart monitor. It can measure if you're nervous or not. Well, he's sitting there and all of a sudden his emotions stop. Then the little needle stops. And the guy who's reading it just goes, oh shit. And then he gets up, wrecks house, freaking, there's this badass scene at the end where he's got like a sword and everything, and he's just like taking people out. And because he's able to turn off those emotions when he needs to. That's what stoicism is. It is the proper emotion at the proper time. Sometimes that means turning it off so you can get shit done. And after the fact, debrief. As you can see, masculinity is very complex. A lot of the bullshit that these alpha chuds are trying to sell you out there, they want to pigeonhole you into some kind of archaic concept that isn't even that archaic, but is perceived to be archaic, is wrong. Thor is strong, right? But he is assisted by his belt Meginjord and his iron gauntlets in order to wield Mjolnir. His sons are stronger than he is, right? Thor is not the strongest. He is still considered a masculine ideal. He's got those protective qualities. He's not afraid to have assistance in wielding Mjolnir, because somebody that is truly masculine, somebody that is confident in their masculinity, somebody that is Drengskapr can admit their faults and admits when they need help. Odin is wise. Odin was not born wise. Odin became wise through sacrifice, diligence, and literally giving up parts of himself in order to gain that wisdom. And Tyr is honorable. Tyr keeps his word to the point where he lost his hand because he promised it to the wolf Fenrir had it turned out that the binding of Fenrir was a trick. He is just, he keeps his word, and due to that, he lost his hand because he wanted to do the right thing and keep his honor, keep his word. Loki is humorous. Loki is not afraid to laugh at himself, to make fun of others. You can't take life too seriously. It is that bully alpha chud that is secretly not confident in his masculinity, who can't laugh at himself, who is too insecure to laugh at himself. That was one of the issues in Lokasenna. The gods were having their hubris, their egos pointed back at them, and they couldn't take it. Hence one of the reasons they bound Loki. And masculinity does not always look the same. We also learned in Lokasenna that Bragi, the god of skalds and poetry, is not a fighter. He's not someone that would take up arms should fan and feces collide. Not every man is a fighter. Not every man has to be a fighter. If you're like a CEO or a corporate executive or whatever, one, you probably don't have a soul. But two, your masculinity is going to look different from my masculinity. I may not do as well in like a corporate boardroom. I may not look the part of a corporate stooge, but that is different, right? Somebody that's a NASA scientist, their masculinity is going to look different than my masculinity, right? They don't have to approach angry people for a living in order to try to de-escalate things and mitigate conflict. They're wrestling with equations and science, not people. Are any of them less of a man because they don't fit my masculine ideal? I spend a lot of time thinking about how I'm going to teach my son to be a man, right? How I'm going to teach him to be masculine. How I'm going to impart Drengskapr onto my child. But doing it without the toxic masculinity that I grew up with. You know, I grew up making fun of other dudes for little feminine things, using gay as a slur. Keep in mind, I am almost 40. All these things that I used to do that I've had to deprogram. And because I'm very confident in my masculinity, it's not a big deal for me to look back and be like, okay, I won't do that thing anymore because I'm confident in who I am. I know who I am. But how do I teach a young boy those things without instituting a lot of the negative things that I grew up with? How do I not perpetuate those bully qualities that I learned when I was his age? Because I've been that guy, you know, I've been the guy that used certain slurs and made fun of a guy if he was too effeminate or if the girl he was with didn't look a certain way. You know, I've been that dude, and it's been a bit of an arduous journey to deprogram those things. That is part of the being better tomorrow. I am learning the things that I did yesterday and how to deprogram those things, partially by listening to women and by listening to marginalized peoples and listening to people that are not like myself, in order to understand their perspectives so that I can better myself and not do those things, right? It's not my intention to cause harm. You know, I thought these things were funny. I got laughs from them. I got positive reinforcement for negative things. And because of that, I understand those things a lot better. And now I know what not to do. So how do I impart that to my son? A lot of it is teaching the characteristics that I talked about in this video. I've been in various martial arts since I was about 9. I have my son in martial arts now. He was in Kung Fu. The program wasn't the greatest. It was great when he was like little, when he was like in kindergarten. Now he's in 2nd grade. So I have him in an MMA program, right? So he's doing, for stand-up, it's Taekwondo, Muay Thai, and Western boxing. And then for the grappling, it's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So very well-rounded. But I have him in that because I know he will learn those masculine qualities, the masculine things that I want to teach him, and in shaping who he is and who he will be as a man and who he will be as Drengr. Because Drengskapr is very much a code in the same way that like chivalry was a code or Bushido was a code, but less quantified and not necessarily associated with a warrior caste per se. In Arch-Heathen times, being a warrior as a man was kind of expected to a certain degree. Being Drengr was the norm. Women could also become Drengr, but for them it was more of a rarity because they had certain qualities where they wanted to be that. So it's part of my deconstruction process in teaching this young boy how to be a man. I am both learning and examining my own masculinity and my own toxic qualities in order to impart a more positive version of masculinity to my son. And that's really what inspired this video, as I've been thinking about it a lot, and I just wanted to impart that wisdom onto my audience. If you agree, comment below. If you disagree, also comment below. Like I've been saying, masculinity does not have one specific type. I think in this video I have projected my version of masculinity, but that's not necessarily the version of masculinity, right? You know, as we see with the gods, that kind of varies. Thor is masculine in a different way than Odin is. Odin is masculine in a different way than Bragi. Odin and Bragi both have more like cerebral qualities, but Odin is obviously a lot more physical, being the inspiration for both Berserker and Wizards through the Other energy, which is the root word for his namesake. So with all that, be better tomorrow than you were yesterday. We are the sum of our actions, not our words.